This week we're talking about orderliness, and I'm so bad at it. Get ready because it's going down. And not only is he a mentor of mine, not only is he a friend of mine, but he's just a really, really cool guy. Please tell the world who you are.
Hey, Nick, it's a pleasure to be here. My name is Brett Smith. I'm a professor of entrepreneurship up here at Miami University, and absolutely delighted to be here.
That's what's up. That's what's up. Well, do me a favor. Let's go ahead and get started. Today, our word is orderliness. And this is a word I struggle with. I mean, I struggle hard with this. When you think of the word orderliness, what do you think about?
Striving to try and get things into sort of right priority. How do we get things in the right order that we ought to sort of tackle them? And it's a big challenge with all the things going on in life, with all, set aside COVID, just all the normal demands of life. Orderliness is a real challenge.
And so in talking about that challenge, right? So you're a professor at Miami University currently, right? And as a professor, you have kids on Zoom, you have people that aren't in class. I mean, classes are getting shut down. Miami was one of those campuses that was one of the worst for COVID in our area. So how are you finding order right now?
Yeah, I think part of orderliness is how do you pick your spots, right? Not everything's going to be in perfect order. So how do we begin to figure out like the big rocks first, right? What's the old, Stephen Covey would say, if you've got all this stuff to put into the jar, I better put the big rocks in first, because otherwise the sand and the water and all that's not going to fit. I think orderliness has sort of that same idea. Like if I'm not taking care of the big stuff first, the other stuff doesn't matter so much. So in our case, right, we moved online. It's like, okay, well, I better figure out technology. I better figure out what the student reaction is going to be on the other side. I better figure out, is it working or not for them? So we've done a lot of chats with the students, just like, hey, is this working? What could be better? How do we work with you? How do we make it? And it doesn't mean we get it perfect. And I think that's sometimes our temptation. Sometimes we hear orderliness and we're like, oh, it's got to be perfect. It doesn't have to be perfect. It won't be perfect. But it does have to be prioritized.
Right, man. It doesn't have to be perfect, but it has to be prioritized. Now I'm going in your house now. Now I know for a fact you're a father. You got kids on soccer teams. You got different kids, right? You don't just have one kid, and you're also a married man, right? How do you find orderliness in your home right now? Or how do you find order in your home right now?
Yeah, it's a great question, Nick, and thanks for asking. The reality is it takes a little bit of intentionality to it, right? Orderliness doesn't just happen. In our case, our kids are a little bit older now. We've got 2 in college. We've got 1 in high school. We've got 1 in grade school still. But across the years, it's been like, we've got 4 kids that got to be in 4 different places. Like we can't even play man-to-man defense. We had to go to zone defense just to figure out how to defend. But I think in all seriousness, like part of it was like, if my wife and I weren't on the same page, then our family wasn't on the same page. So one of the things that we do, it's a small little thing, but every weekend we sit down and the 2 of us sort of map out our week ahead. And then we map that out for ourselves. We map that out for our marriage, and we map that out for our family. And it just helps us at least anticipate. You never know what's coming, but at least to the extent that we know, it gives us a little bit of a chance to say, okay, of all that stuff, if we want to keep it in order, let's do a little planning to make sure it happens.
Wow, that's huge. So this is you do that every weekend, every single weekend. That's awesome.
Every weekend.
So my next question to you is: you have 4.
The reality is.
No, go ahead.
So the reality is, I promise you, if we don't do it for a week, I know we didn't do it for a week, because the entire week is chaos, right? What's the opposite of orderliness? It's like chaos. And so it's a small. We'd say it's a high leverage thing, right? It's a little thing that makes a big difference. And for us, it's a half an hour to sit down, plan out the week, sort of figure out who's on first and where we going and how we getting everybody there. Makes a massive difference for us.
Yeah. Now for me, I look at the time and I see like to get that order, I have to invest this amount of time up front. And am I willing to move all the other things out of the way to do this one thing right now to make sure there's order for the next couple of days, for the next semester, for the next week? What was the process that you went through to get to that this makes sense and this is what makes sense for us?
Yeah, I think, Nick, honestly, it's the lack of process that sort of gets you there, right? I mean, what causes anyone to change a behavior? Often it's because whatever they're doing isn't working, right? So when we had our first child, it was like, okay, there's two of us and one of them, like we can figure this out. But all of a sudden you have a second child, a third child. It's like, this isn't working so well. And so it really came from a place of, honestly, disorder. It came from a place of, this isn't how we wanted things to be. We're running into a lot more confusion and frustration, and they're little things, but they're seeming to cause a lot of friction and a lot of problems. So it was a very small step to say, hey, if we keep doing this, we're going to keep getting the same results. Why don't we try and do something different? And so we're like, hey, let's just try this. Let's just do a little bit of planning. And again, as I said, it's not a ton of time, but it makes a massive difference for the next 7 days.
Wow. So has this manifested in your business? So I know you're an entrepreneur outside of being a professor. You've been an entrepreneur for multiple years, and you've done some great things on Miami's campus. How do you operate in a level of orderliness within your work and your side business? How do you do that?
Yeah, I think there's a parallel here, Nick, maybe that it's a little bit of planning, right? So a little bit of planning goes a long way. By the way, when we plan, it's just that, it's a plan. It's going to change no matter what we plan. We don't know at the time we plan what on earth is going to happen. Right. We weren't thinking last semester, hey, you know what? Let's plan this, and then a pandemic's going to hit. Let's be ready for that. Like, no one was thinking that. So the reality is, what we've got to do, we build a plan and then you adjust. Okay. But if you totally, right, what's the old adage? If you fail to plan, you plan to fail, right? So if we don't plan a little bit, if we don't at least say, hey, in my business, I'm not exactly sure what's going to happen, but I better have some sense of who my customer is and how I'm going to get them. And do I have enough money to start the business and all those kinds of things? Otherwise, right, we're going to run out there and we're going to, fail. So I don't think planning guarantees success, but I think lack of planning, increases your odds of not being so successful. So I think the same parallel, it's a half hour with my wife. It's maybe, days or weeks on my business, but the reality is it's a little bit of planning that goes a long way in terms of trying to at least anticipate the things we see that may cause chaos and disorder. There's an old adage, right? They say a business plan never survives first contact with a customer. Right. And so we plan, but of course it's going to change. Right. And that's cool. We have to be, I think there's some middle level of orderliness that works. Right. If we don't do any, we're in trouble. If we do too much, again, order's a good thing, but you get to the OCD level of like, I have to have every little thing, and you got a problem too. But I think a little bit, you got to find your right spot for you, but a little bit goes a long way.
So I got to ask this question. I've never asked you this question before. Were you an athlete? Were you an athletic kid? Like, did you play sports? Like, because I know your daughter, didn't your daughter play college soccer?
She does. My daughter's a college soccer player. She's a far better athlete than I am. I wasn't near the athlete you were. But yeah, growing up, I played sports, 3 seasons a year. And then in high school, I played baseball and football. Okay. And again, I think athletically, there's a parallel, right? Yeah. If the football season's coming up, you better be lifting the weights in the summertime, right? I think there's a little bit of planning, same thing.
What I've noticed in my life was I had coaches that had order, and I trusted them, and they would call the play, and I would run the play in which that they called. But I really didn't have much order other than whatever play you're going to call, that's what I'm going to do. But as a man, I'm called to call the plays, right? And I know there's multiple guys that are listening to this that are involved in this Speak Love kind of community, right? That are in this position where they're moving from being one who's being told what to do and moving into being someone who is telling people what to do. And like I know you've had to go through this sort of maturation, if you will. I want to know what's something we could say to them, and what's a process that you use to move from being told to now telling.
Yeah. I think, again, if I step back just a little, Nick, I think for me, it starts with values and priorities. Like if I don't have that in order, it sort of doesn't matter what plan I've got, right? It's totally out of whack. But if I can get some of that stuff right first, it's a little bit easier to figure out how I'm going to make the decisions about planning. I referenced it. I was only half kidding. Stephen Covey had written a book called First Things First. And it was just one of these books that really struck me about how do you get things in order? How do you get your time in order? Like we always worry about our money. How do we get our money in order? That's important. But honestly, at the end of our lives, we would trade tons of money for a little bit of time. And so the question is, how do we get our time in order? And if we can manage our calendar and get our time in order. So if I'm looking at guys, I would say, hey, find some other people that have done it, right? If a book's great for you, awesome. Go read First Things First. But if you see someone who's doing it, and go talk to them, go ask them, how did they do it? Maybe meet with them a couple of times. Maybe ask them to buzz you back in a couple of weeks and say, hey, how's it going? And so I think the more that we can have positive examples of how it works, the more we can start to put some of it into our own lives. And I guess that the other thing I'd say, Nick, is we don't have to go from nothing to all. So we don't have to be like, oh my gosh, I better schedule every single, no. Just do a little bit. Just start for a week. Just try something, man, and see how it works for you. Certain ways of planning and orderliness are going to work better for some people than others. That's cool, but try something. Just kind of get moving in that direction.
I love that. You know what? This is my last question for you too. There are some people that come to me and their life is in complete disarray. I mean, they're financially in disarray. Their security is in disarray. Their family structure is in disarray. Just absolute disarray. And a lot of times, I've met people that have gone on a bad route because they felt like there's no order, and so I'm just going to join the disorder, right? If you had 1 minute to speak to someone in that phylum, in that area where they're like, you know what, things are going bad, it's bad, there's nothing that's going to get good out of this, where there is no order, so why should I have order, right? What would you say to them?
Yep. I'd ask them one question. I'd say, how's that going for you? And the reality is not very well, right?
Right.
and so if things aren't going well, like I go back to my own story. My own story was, why did I start doing it? Because things weren't going so well, right? So I would say that to somebody else. If that's not working for you, man, maybe it's time to try something else. And again, it doesn't have to be everything, right? This is a long process. Think of this as a journey, but take one small step. And just see if one step doesn't make a big difference. Try planning just a little in your health. Try planning just a little in your finances. Try planning just a little in your relationships or your house or with your kids, and see how that goes. And maybe just try that for a little bit of time and then see what happens. And I think usually what we see is that there's huge benefits to it. Don't try and you don't need every single thing organized in every part of your life tomorrow, but let's start with one part now and see if that doesn't make some big differences there.
I love it. I love it. Brett Smith, thank you so much for being our guest today. You got 10 seconds. What's one last thing you want to say to the world?
My one thing is I love Nick Jackson. I love what he does, and it is absolutely my pleasure to be here, guys. If planning makes any difference, if you want just a little more orderliness, man, just try it. Just try one small step. Just try it today.
I love it. Try it. This is Nick Jackson and Brett Smith, and go out there and try it. Let's be orderly.